Bonjour, good day. Thanks for being here. We've been raising lots of concerns about the fact that we're seeing in society this ongoing trend that any crisis happens, it is workers that are asked to sacrifice. And right now, when we're experiencing unprecedented inflation, we're seeing people that are feeling squeezed, they can't afford their groceries, they can't afford their bills. At the very same time, the CEOs of the companies they work for are making more salary, making more compensation than they've ever made before. So inspired by a law that was proposed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, what we're proposing today is to put in place a tax on the excess salaries of CEOs. And what this bill will propose to do is to finally say clearly that if you can afford to pay CEOs exorbitant salaries, then you should increase the wages of workers. This is to decrease inequality. This is to force companies to stop the inequality that continues to grow. 25 years ago, the gap between what the median income of a worker at a company and the CEO was about 100 times difference in salary. Today, the average is 243, over 240 times. Massive increase over 25 years. And then we've got some egregious examples. One example, I'm sure you're not surprised I'm going to give you, is Galen Weston, who earns 431 times more than the median income of someone at his company. 431 times higher pay. That is excessive. People look at that and get frustrated and say, why is it that he gets 431 times more pay than the median income earner of someone who is at that company? That is outrageous. And so what we're proposing is an incentive. If corporations ensure that there's less gap between the median income of a worker there, between workers and the CEOs, if there's less gap, they will not have to contribute higher tax. But if there's a massive gap, they can afford to pay a huge salary for their CEO, then they can afford to contribute more so that Canadians can have more support and more resources. And that's what we're proposing today. Donc aujourd'hui, ce qu'on propose, c'est de finalement dire clairement que ce n'est pas la bonne chose à faire quand le PDG d'une entreprise gagne un salaire excessif, beaucoup trop, que ce qu'un travailleur dans la même entreprise, un travailleur de moyen gagne dans la même entreprise. Donc, dans le passé, la différence entre le salaire d'un PDG et le salaire d'un travailleur un moyen salaire d'un travailleur était 100 fois. Maintenant, le moyen, c'est plus de 230 fois. 240 fois, donc une grande différence. Et si je donne un exemple spécifique, Galen Weston, le PDG de Loblaws, gagne 431, plus de 430 fois plus qu'un salaire moyen, le salaire d'un travailleur, le moyen salaire d'un travailleur. Ça, c'est quelque chose qui est excessif, c'est un grand problème. Et si une entreprise peut payer un PDG un gros montant de salaire comme ça, et ils peuvent se permettre de payer plus pour les travailleurs, le moyen salaire pour les travailleurs. Et sinon, donc, ils doivent payer plus de taxes. Donc, ce qu'on propose, c'est un projet de loi pour taxer les entreprises où il y a une grande différence entre le paye ou le salaire des PDG et des travailleurs. C'est quelque chose que Bernie Sanders et Elizabeth Warren ont proposé aux États-Unis. C'est une façon d'augmenter les salaires des travailleurs. C'est une façon de réduire les inégalités entre les travailleurs et les PDG. Et c'est pour la première fois de dire clairement que ce n'est pas acceptable. C'est inacceptable que les PDG gagnent des salaires excessifs en même temps que les salaires des travailleurs ont baissé à cause de l'inflation. Donc, on propose une solution concrète. And so, with our solution concrete, this is something we're going to see where the other leaders stand. Do they stand on the side of billionaires? Do they stand on the side of Galen Weston? Or do they stand on the side of workers? This is a concrete way, a measure that's going to lift up workers and tell companies a clear message that the inequality that exists in those companies is wrong and that we're going to incentivize having less inequality. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
What would the tax rate be, or what would you like to see in terms of that rate?
Yes. Yeah. The rate that we're proposing is a sliding scale, so depending on how many times more the CEO salary is. And so it goes from, if it's 0 to 50, then it's 0.5, up to the maximum 400 to 500 times the salary of the median income of a worker there. Then it's 4% would be the max. So a 4% increase in tax. that would go on if a company has a massive gap between the worker and the CEO.
And then what do you make of, I guess, Pierre Poilievre and Elon Musk laughing about 69 jokes when it, relates to the CBC?
Yeah, I think it really exposes who Pierre Poilievre is. This is someone at a time when people are upset and angry about the fact that they can't afford their groceries. One of the most common talked about issues, the issue that people everywhere I go across the country are talking about is how it's hard to afford groceries. Anytime I'm in a grocery store, people come up and say, hey, like, we're really angry and frustrated. Like, thanks for giving us some voice. And we're targeting who's at fault here, the greed of these CEOs that are using inflation as cover to pay for more or to make more profit while people can't afford their groceries. That's what I'm hearing about. And what is Pierre Poilievre doing? He's spending his time attacking journalists who ask hard questions. Like, how is that someone that can be prime minister? They're afraid of a tough question. They attack journalists. Like, what leader, what strong leader spends time attacking journalists? Why aren't you attacking the powerful billionaires that are exploiting people? That's what people are telling me to do. And so it really shows, the kind of character of someone, that they're going to attack someone that's asking them a tough question. And that they're going to go to a billionaire tech giant for help. He went whining to a billionaire tech giant for help to attack journalists. I mean, that's pretty embarrassing if you think about it.
Que je peux vous demander sur le voyage du premier ministre chez des amis qui sont particulièrement riches apparemment aussi, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de la situation du jugement de M. Trudeau d'accepter un voyage en Jamaïque chez des amis de la famille, mais aussi des gens qui vivent dans la richesse?
J'ai souvent pensé sur cette question. Comment le Premier ministre, avec le pouvoir de régler les grands problèmes dans la vie des gens, n'agit pas? Pourquoi? Souvent, j'ai pensé de ça. Et je pense que c'est la même frustration des Canadiens aussi. Le Premier ministre a le pouvoir de changer les choses, d'améliorer les choses, de régler les problèmes. Et si on parle des problèmes dans la vie des gens maintenant, le fait que les gens ne peuvent pas se permettre de trouver du logement, ne peuvent pas se permettre de payer les factures pour le loyer, ou ne peut pas trouver du logement abordable. On peur que notre système de santé va devenir un système de santé à l'américaine où on doit payer pour avoir des services. Pourquoi le Premier ministre ne prend pas les actions nécessaires de régler ces choses, de défendre notre système de santé entièrement public, de bâtir plus de logements abordables? Et je pense que cette vacance montre un autre exemple de pourquoi. Parce que ce mode de vie, le mode de vie de ce Premier ministre, la vie de ce Premier ministre fait en sorte qu'il ne comprend pas les défis des gens. Il n'a jamais vécu des difficultés avec son logement. Il n'a jamais eu des appels des gens qui disent que vos parents doivent payer plus d'argent pour... sinon, ils vont faire faillite et vous allez perdre votre maison. Il n'a jamais entendu ces appels. Il n'a jamais eu peur que son père, peut-être, ne peut pas avoir accès à un centre de réhabilitation parce qu'ils n'ont pas les moyens de payer pour un centre à but lucratif ou un centre privé. Il n'a jamais vécu ça. Et ça montre pourquoi il n'agit pas pour régler les problèmes que les gens font face.
Il se défend en disant le commissaire au conflit d'intérêts à l'éthique avait approuvé ce voyage-là. Vous en pensez quoi de cette défense-là?
Pour moi, ce n'est pas à propos de la défense. C'est pour moi, ça montre la différence de vie qu'il a vécue. Et ça donne plus de raisons pourquoi les gens... ça donne une explication pourquoi il n'agit pas pour régler les problèmes. Parce qu'il ne comprend pas les défis des gens aujourd'hui. J'ai souvent partagé l'histoire que quand j'étais dans mes 20 ans, quand j'avais 20 ans, que j'ai eu... mon frère habitait avec moi. Et j'ai dû travailler 3 emplois pour s'assurer qu'on peut avoir la nourriture, pour acheter les épiceries. Et c'était un temps difficile. Et je me souviens de ce temps. On était les deux ensemble. Et mes parents, on était dans une situation difficile. Et c'est pourquoi je m'occupe aujourd'hui des coûts d'épicerie. Parce que j'ai vécu ça. Je me souviens ce temps de ma vie. Et la différence, c'est que le Premier ministre ne comprend pas tout ça. Et cette vacance est un autre exemple d'un mode de vie qui ne donne pas une clarité ou une connaissance ou une compréhension des défis des gens. Et c'est clair. Et c'est pourquoi il n'agit pas. C'est pourquoi il ne règle pas les problèmes. Il ne prend pas au sérieux les crises dans les vies des gens. Et c'est un autre exemple de ça. Donc, je ne parle pas des questions d'éthique dans ces questions. Je parle d'un mode de vie qui n'informe pas les réalités des monsieur, madame, tout le monde.
Just in English, the conference that the commissioner cleared this trip. Do you think the Prime Minister should have taken it?
And so what I said in French, and I think it's important to be able to repeat this, it's not about, in my mind, it's not about whether the commissioner approved it, or whether there's an ethics issue here. I'm not actually touching the ethics concerns here. I'm touching the reality that we've got a prime minister who has so much power. Like the prime minister can actually really meaningfully fix a lot of problems that Canadians are faced with. And the fact that we see a prime minister unwilling to take a strong stance on fighting things like the for-profit encroachment of services in our healthcare system, like he's not really doing much to fight back against that because he's never really worried about his family member that's unable to get access to services because they can't afford it. He doesn't understand that reality. He's never really had to worry about losing his home. He's not really worried about fighting the housing crisis with everything he has. And I think that what this vacation shows is just another example of a prime minister that doesn't understand the realities of everyday Canadians, hasn't lived those struggles, and is not willing to use every power, every tool at his disposal to fix those problems. And that's really what I'm highlighting.
Deadline at 9 p.m. tonight for the labor negotiations. In your meetings with the Liberal government that happen regularly, have you expressed concern, perhaps advice? Do you have a solution, do you think, for this impasse between the government and the public sector union?
Yeah, I've raised this issue with the government. I've raised this with the Prime Minister, and I've said really clearly, the public sector workers who were there for us, were there for Canadians in the pandemic, who delivered record program to get money out the door, to keep people in their homes, to keep people able to put food on the table. Those public sector workers who did so much in the pandemic deserve respect. And really what this comes down to is the Prime Minister and the government ensuring that these workers have a fair contract, and that acknowledges the inflation that they're going through, and it acknowledges the work that they've done for Canadians. So we've said to the Prime Minister,
are addressing that? Do you think the union's demands are addressing those concerns?
yeah, what the union is asking for is pay that acknowledges the work of their members and acknowledges the impact of inflation. And so my message to the Prime Minister and to the government is negotiate a fair contract. You can avoid a strike. You can avoid any sort of disruption in services. And the solution is negotiate a fair contract. And I encourage the government to do exactly that.
If the government considers back to work legislation in the case of a strike, does that put the deal that you have for the supply and confidence agreement in jeopardy?
We said from the beginning, we envisioned that there might be a scenario where the government would bring in back to work legislation. They've done it in the past, and they said really clearly to them, that is not on for us. We will never support that. You can't count on our support for that. And that was something that was said right up front. I looked directly at the Prime Minister and said, we're a workers' party. We're not going to support back to work legislation. Never consider that as an option for us. And so we're just not going to do it. And so I made that very clear. But I also want to make it clear that it doesn't have to get to that. It doesn't have to get to a strike. It doesn't have to get to back to work legislation. We're not there yet. Right now, there's a negotiation that's happening, and I encourage the government to negotiate fairly and come to a fair contract.
Juste pour être bien clair en français là-dessus, pour vous, l'entente ne tient plus s'il y a une loi spéciale pour le retour au travail. Je parle bien de l'entente avec les
non, ce qu'on a dit, que c'est jamais quelque chose que le gouvernement peut présenter à nous pour avoir notre appui. Donc, ce n'est pas quelque chose qu'il peut considérer dans notre entente. Pas du tout, parce qu'on a dit dans le commencement de ces négociations, ce n'est pas sur la table. Donc, vous ne pouvez jamais compter sur nous. Je l'ai dit clairement au début de ces discussions que vous ne pouvez jamais compter sur nous pour une loi pour le retour au travail. Ce n'est pas acceptable pour nous. On est une partie des travailleurs et on ne va jamais appuyer une telle sorte de projet de loi. Donc, j'étais clair. Mais je veux aussi être clair que c'est une hypothèque et on n'est pas là. Le gouvernement a tous les pouvoirs de négocier un bon contrat pour éviter tout ça.
But if there's a strike and Canadians are seeing delays in getting EI applications approved and passport applications, and the union president said there'd be delays in approving imports and other kind of air, rail, and transportation. What's your message to them, especially those, you know, who need these payments or these applications to go through in a timely fashion?
My message is to the government. None of that has to happen. None of that has to happen. The workers do not want to go on strike. Workers never want to go on strike. Strike is the last thing that a worker wants to do. It's difficult for workers. It's hard on their families. It's hard on the public. No one wants to go to strike. So that does not have to happen. My message is actually to the Prime Minister, or to the government generally, negotiate a fair contract with these workers, respect the fact that these are the workers that delivered so much for us in the pandemic. So many people are so thankful that we were able to get through that difficult time, and it's because of these public sector workers. So let's make sure they're respected.
So is the deal done if they introduce back-to-work legislation?
No, I want to be very clear. First of all, it doesn't have to get to that. There's no reason that we need to get to that point. That's not something we need to get to. And I said to the Prime Minister that it's just not something you should ever, it's not even within a deal. Like there's no arrangement where we're going to support that. So the Prime Minister knew that very clearly entering into the deal, that it's not something he can count on for our support. So that's separate from the deal. That's never something that we're going to support. So from the beginning of the negotiation, we said you should never count on that. But I want to make it clear, we have time now, the government has time now to negotiate a settlement on this that respects these workers, and that's where they should be putting their effort.
I guess it matters that the government makes a confidence vote.
Well, I told the Prime Minister if they do, that's not something we're going to support. But again, it doesn't have to get to that point. We're not going to support that. They can't count on our support for that, but it's not going to get there.
Monsieur Singh, juste pour être bien clair, là, c'est séparé du deal, là.
Yeah, parce qu'on a dit que ce n'est pas quelque chose. On parlait de les votes de confiance. J'ai dit que vous ne pouvez jamais compter sur nous pour un vote sur le retour au travail. Donc, c'était jamais dit. Mais c'était déjà dit que c'est quelque chose qu'on ne va jamais appuyer. Donc, le gouvernement savait ça.
Mais votre entente tiendrait.
Oui.
D'accord.
Galen Weston, what do you think of him stepping down and a new CEO coming in? Did your pressure work? Do you think it will change anything?
Well, I mean, I'm not worried about Galen Weston. I think he's gonna be fine. I don't even know if this is actually even stepping down or if he's getting a promotion. Who knows how these things work in their corporate restructuring. But what I do know is that the new inflation numbers have come out today, and the inflation on food still is high, and we need action. And the whole purpose of hauling Galen Weston and the CEOs of these large corporate grocery stores to committee is to show that they're not going to fix this on their own. When I asked the question, how much profit is enough, they could not answer. Galen Weston could not answer that question because there's no limit to how much profit they want to make. And that means it is the responsibility of government to step up and protect Canadians in the face of something that we need. People can't put off buying food. It's not something you can put off because it's too expensive. People need it. It's a necessity. And that's where the government has to step up and provide more protection. And we've outlined some concrete things that can happen. Better competition laws. The Competition Bureau has limited tools. Those tools need to be strengthened to protect Canadians because right now, the majority of grocery stores that you go to are owned by just run by just three CEOs. That is a problem. We need better protections for consumers, better protections for producers, and we need to make sure that we are fighting to protect Canadians when it comes to the high cost of groceries. And that's what these CEOs have exposed. They're not going to do it on their own. And that is a role of government to step up.
So how do you see the shuffle? Like, is it just musical chairs at the top of this corporation? Do you think it might make a difference? Do you think maybe he just couldn't continue in that role, given all the pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You'd have to ask him why they did it and what their structuring is and what this means for their company. But what I can tell you for Canadians, they have been telling me this is something they're worried about, and I want them to know is we're going to keep on fighting back. And we know that the problem that no one else is willing to address, there are issues of inflation that are obviously global in nature, but there are specifically impacts on inflation coming from the corporate greed of these CEOs that are using this opportunity to make more profit, and we're the only party saying that that is wrong, and we need to do something about it.
And just finally, your private members bill is proposing a change to the way taxes happen. But private members' bills, you can't do that through a private member's bill. Only the government can introduce a bill that, either encourages spending or, approves spending or a tax change. So what are you trying to achieve with this bill if you can't do that with a private member's bill?
What we're doing is we actually are proposing exactly what was proposed in the States by a U.S. Senate bill. We're mirroring that same principle that the companies that are not paying their workers enough will have to pay higher tax, and companies that lift up the wage of their workers will not. And we think this is an appropriate thing to do, and we believe in it.
But in Canada's parliamentary system, you can't introduce a tax measure through a private member's bill. So what are you trying to do?
We'll show you the bill when we propose it, and that's what we're trying to do. Thanks so much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.